Welcome to our weekly cybersecurity article review for Thursday, August 3, 2023. And we continue to see a great rise in the amount of cybersecurity events, often highlighted by so many news sources from day to day. So today we look at six of these, top cybersecurity incidents that took place in July, in the past month of July. And for many persons, the listing that we actually be looking at might not be um, fall within the scope of some of the incidents that you have actually experienced. However, it's always good to look and to see those activities that are actually um, affecting various organizations that we can actually gain some insights into to help with making our organizations a better environment in terms of their operation. And this particular list that we will be looking at is one that is taken according to an article published by Cybersecurity Hub. And I will place a link to this article so that you can definitely get all the necessary details from that article itself. And as it relates to these six top incidents highlighted by that particular article, we are looking at the very first one, which is hackers steal 20 million from Revolut. Also, Fun fiction site targeted by DDoS attack. Microsoft access emails stolen from U.S. agencies. HCA healthcare data breach impacts 11 million patients. ST Lauder data stolen in cyber attack, and also Roblox data breach exposes developer data. And many of you might have been already familiar with some of these happenings. So, with that said, we have Paul Robbins, so Chris Carter, Jonathan Fisher, who will be providing us with their expert assessment of these incidents. So, guys, we um, have a number of incidents ahead, and as usual, welcome. Thanks for taking the time to share in these conversations. But the big question in all of this, were, any of these incidents on your radar, any at all, in terms of this particular listing that was identified in this article as being the top six um, incidents that have taken place in the past month?
Yeah, I could go first. One of the things that stood out to me in this article was the various types of attacks and the various types of verticals that were impacted. And in cyber, we tend to focus in on maybe one vertical or one type of attack. I know when the Move It vulnerability was exploited, and hundreds of customers and clients were impacted by that. We focused on that, but really, these are things from money theft, data theft, insider threat, multiple verticals, and things of that nature. So if I'm a security professional, I'm reading this, let's say you're not in any of these verticals, but I would read it from the cautionary standpoint of, okay, how can they get me in an attack? And the first attack that's mentioned there with Revolt is interesting, because if you pick up on the line that says that they were in there for several months, um, that's how all these major attacks happen. I think people think that it's just boom, it just happens. They get in day one and it's over. But these criminals are in your organizations for months. I think Singapore Air was one of them. They were in there for years, just reading patterns and gaining more strength and intel inside of your organization to make the attack worth their time and efforts. So that's my initial thought.
Okay, great. Jonathan?
Yeah, one thing that I think I really like about this is, as Paul said, the different vectors that were used, but also looked at the different industries, right? It's not just one thing that they're looking at, right? We're looking at a fintech, we're looking at, government agencies, we're looking at healthcare, I mean, we're even looking at cosmetics, um, and developers. And the one thing I did pick up is, as Paul said, just how long some of them have been in there for. If you look at the last one with Roblox, it was saying that it was for attendees that attended those conferences from 2017 to 2021, right? So that's a very long time for it to finally be exposed that, hey, your data might have been breached, right? And for them just finding out now. Um, so just because you find out at day one that, hey, there's an incident, who knows how long they've been in there, how much data they've impacted, have changed. So those were my initial thoughts while reading through some of these different uh, incidents.
Okay, sure. And there are a number of things that I've actually identified coming across from all of these. I mean, incidents that have been highlighted. But one of the questions that came to mind that I said I wanted to, I mean, just to hear your guys' feedback on is as a really when you look at all these six incidents, um, based on your analysis of these incidents, are you seeing any new, I mean, TTPs, I mean, the techniques, the procedures being used by bad actors based on all of what have been written or identified in these articles? Are we seeing the same set of things? Are we seeing the wheel being reinvented, or are we seeing where the attackers are basically using these TTPs in a more creative way?
Yeah, the fact that we're still dealing with DDoS is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
I've been in this industry for 14 years, and I remember DDoS. That was a big thing 14 years ago, and it's not only DDoS, but there were a couple last year, a couple major ones last year. That was
Yeah.
cross-site scripting.
There we
Like,
have Chris. Oh, that's great. I think Chris is on. Okay, good.
yeah, Chris is on. But we had cross-site scripting too. So if we can't nail, and as you've noticed in the several episodes that we've done, I kind of use an analogy of like, okay, if someone is still breaking into your front door because you have a door lock from the 80s, you got to do something to modernize it to where it's not just easy to pick. You think of those old, I have 100 and something year old house here, and look at some of the locks on the door. I could do with a pin. I could pin and do it. So if we're not modernizing our efforts to deal with the 1.0 issues, then how are we going to expect to deal with the 2.0 issues?
That's a great
Yeah.
point. Yes,
Yeah.
Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, you have to cover the fundamentals, and I think I always love your analogies, Paul. It's just they crack me up, right? DDoS, but I think at the end of the day, we've evolved as as a society, as an economy, and data. Right? You'll hear this over and over again. Data is the new currency. Data really is the asset. So regardless of where you are, if you're a beauty supply company, a gaming company, a hospital company, if you have data, that's what people or the bad guys are going to be looking at. So I think it's very important to understand how data is being used, who's using the data, how they're accessing the data, and how you protect the data. So hopefully this conversation will turn into a data protection conversation, because I think really at the end of the day, we have to understand, the stages of data, right? You create it, you store it, you access it, you share it, you retire it, right? So all these different stages of the data, fundamentally, I think that's really where we need to start. But putting the DDoS aside, because that's a whole nother. If you're still going through having DDoS issues, then you should probably take a step back and look at your the mechanisms you have in place to control access to, who's accessing your data from where and how. But yeah, hopefully, Richie, I'm hoping we'll get into data protection, DLP, and that type of stuff.
Mhm.
Sure. Definitely. I think you're definitely on the right, part there based on what you have actually said. So when you actually look at each of these articles um, that have been identified, for the very first one we have where hackers steal 20 million from Revolut. The very first thing that I've identified is as it relates to the trends in these incidents is you have the exploited software vulnerability. Then we have the DDoS attack. Then we have thoroughly exploited software vulnerability leading to email, theft. Then we have data breach, which goes to the PII, uh, data theft again. Then we also have data theft. So going right back to what you said, Chris, we're looking at the data being involved, data being that key currency in all of this. So, guys, what's your thought in terms of what's the most maybe what's the best way do we actually deal with these events that are actually affecting our organizations? So often we are seeing the same trends, the same TTPs. How do we actually manage all of this that is actually happening within our organizations? That's I think one of the key questions.
Chris is on the right path of data, and I hope that this does bleed into a data discussion. But Riche, you brought up something very interesting when it comes to software. So they're the Hatfields and the McCoys. Chris, I'll give you a shout out here. They're the Bears and the Packers. We have these massive rivalries that take place in our world. The worst one in our industry is DevOps versus SecOps. And I've been in these meetings before where there is cursing, there is throwing of paper, there is slamming of tables, there's all of this stuff that takes place. It is a brutal, brutal rivalry. You have DevOps that just want to create code, go live as quick as possible. SecOps is they're the inhibitors, quote unquote, inhibitors to safely enable these apps that are going. And this is this doesn't require a vendor. This doesn't require massive amounts of investment other than maybe time. But when the most successful security organizations that I've seen, the most successful organizations that have protected themselves are when DevOps and SecOps are working well together. And when they work well together, then the software and the applications that are involved with the organizations are then safely enabled to go live, whether it's impacting our internal company, our external customers, or things of that nature. That's major important, which then now that's going to lead into the data piece of it, because that's where the employees' roles and responsibilities go to. But I think it's taking that step back to say, if DevOps and SecOps are fighting all the time and one group is trying to circumvent the ways of another group, that's where a lot of these issues come from. It's normalizing that relationship.
But I think the question in all of this, what can we do? What solution do we have? Because based on the fact that you have DevSecOps within an organization, executives at times, as we all know, in most cases, they will tend to go with the development team in terms of quick release, production items, all the various tools, resources into the marketplace to get your business going versus, looking at what security is actually doing in terms of seen as being the inhibitor to the overall process. So is it a case whereby the executives need to better understand so that they can actually provide that level of synergy between the DevSec of situation that is happening?
I don't know if it's they have to be experts. I think they need to be well informed and trust their security experts. Right. Well, what's the point of having someone that you want to bring on as like, your chief security officer if you're not going to listen to them or take their advice? So I think that's where it needs to come into. The business executives, they have so much that they have to work on, right? With the development, trying to maintain the business that, yeah, security might be something that goes on the back burner for them, but that's also not their job. That's not probably their forte unless they are, specifically in the security, type of realm where they've had that and they decided to build their own business off of that. So I think the big thing is bringing someone on that is an expert and that they will trust. Um, Someone I think that can maybe push against executives when they kind of want to cut those fundings or push that back. I think that's one of the big things that the executive teams need to be looking at is the quality and the expertise of their senior leaders in the security fields that they have on, and are they actually listening to them and trusting them?
Yeah, that's a huge part of it. It's funny. I'm laughing because I was sitting with the client last week, and he said, "I'm not sure the business understand." And this is a company that, like, if I said the name of it, you would recognize it right away. But his thought was, he said, "I'm not sure, our executives understand the level of risk that they're taking on in order to keep the business afloat." So he's saying, "I'm looking for you guys to come in and help me put things in place that do not, in the process of doing it, you don't want to interrupt business operations, but to get them to a security posture that I think is is fitting for the business." Now, there's that conversation itself you can unpack in many different levels, but I think what it boils down to is security in the business have to be on the same page. It's the responsibility of the security leader to earn the trust and the confidence of the business. Once those things are aligned, especially when it comes to data, then the conversations and the investments and the divestitures become a lot easier. But you start to hear it, and it sounds cliche, but it is an axiom. It's an axiom when it comes to security in the business. Both have to be on the same page, speaking the same language, and heading in the same direction.
Yeah, I think it really comes down to is talking, and I think we've talked about this before on here, is translating cyber risk into the language that the executives understand. And that language is money. I'm tired of people saying, oh, CEOs are idiots and they're not smart and the board's stupid and they don't care. You don't get to that point in your career by being like, you're smart, but you're smart in another way. You're smart with money. So, Chris, I'm sure you do a really good job of this because you're a businessman, but we really have to get security professionals comfortable with talking to the business. Don't show up with a Nessus report that shows subnets and 255.255.10.10.10 heat map. Because it's like it's a whole other language to the business. But if you go to the business and say, okay, this risk right here can equal $25 million in damage, then the room goes quiet. And it's like, wait a minute, because all they heard was $25 million in damage. or getting them to understand the money or their jobs that are at stake. If I'm a security engineer and we experience a cyber incident, I lose my job, I'm going on Indeed.com and I'm finding another job that's probably going to pay more, that's probably remote, whatever. So it's really it's a wash. There are no COO, CFO, CEO jobs on Indeed.com. Like that is not an easy job to find. But so when they realize, hey, this amazing financial package that I have could be at jeopardy because I could be the scapegoat for this incident, now they're going to start to take things seriously. Security is emotional. It's a very emotional thing. As academic and as head knowledge as it is, people it's an emotional thing because it emotionally impacts them once it's exploited. So how do we hit the emotion in a smart way to get them to understand the risks that they're facing?
Yeah, very important points. One of the questions that I'm actually thinking as I'm listening to all the valuable points that you guys are saying is, are security experts, I mean, professionals, actually taking enough time to, for example, listen to or read or keep abreast of the current happenings within the cybersecurity market? Based on what is happening, do you think that we're spending enough time to be abreast with all these incidents that are actually taking place.
The question is there enough time in the day to do that, right? I was again, I was talking to another client, and he was saying, I really want to apologize because sometimes you'll send me a text message or you'll email me, and I'm literally in meetings answering IMs, sending messages, so it's not personal. So please, I'm like, I get it. So I think you just have to, as security leaders, security leaders have to think about what they're not going to. It's probably easier to think about what you're not going to do versus what you're going to do. Scheduling, building times in your calendar, dedicated times to maybe spend 5-20 minutes a day um, consuming information. I remember I was working for an organization, and we had an executive briefing. We would get an email every day with the top, threat intel. But I don't think there's enough time in the day to do it. It's a matter of how you prioritize your time and how you filter the information that's coming in. And most importantly, how is all of that relevant to the business, the sector, the industry, the vertical that you're in? But you're never going to be able to capture all of the the stuff that's out there. It's just too much.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that's the value of having a plan of action and milestones and system security plan via risk assessment. And that's the thing, because yeah, time management is a vulnerability in cybersecurity and risk. Time management. That's not, you can't plug in something and solve time management. But if you have that poem that's there that says, okay, here are our top 10 risks, then when you come in every day, you're like, okay, this is number one. How are we doing number one? I'm not going to listen to anything else. Obviously fires come up here and there. I get it. But if you can have a plan that the whole organization is marching to, and you've identified the top risks, not just technical, not just, hey, let's do a bake off of firewalls or endpoint detection tools, but we don't have an incident response plan, or we have an incident response plan that we got off of Google and we haven't tested it in 7 years. That's a major risk, and that's not something that costs a ton of money. That's not something that costs a ton of money. Now, Chris, you're laughing because you run across this all the time. so but that's the thing. It's like, let's know what our corporate risks are and work towards that, and not just get chasing fires and listening to
Well,
all these other things that don't matter to the business.
yeah.
I think that's a very valuable, point based on how we have actually, bring that across. Uh, no doubt, we are bombarded with so many things. Not to mention those guys who are actually on the technical side, especially in those SOCs. All of these many alerts. Not to mention if you are actually having a lot of false positives, all of these vulnerabilities. Things happening within the organization, but not taking that time to understand what are your, as Paul rightly said, your top risks to the business itself versus, non-business risks. Then you're going to have a lot of challenges here between IT and cybersecurity, not coming to that agreement as to what makes this business operate, what is important to this organization. I think that is where there's a lot of challenge between IT security, um, trying to ensure that the business is functional versus just chasing, as I said before, outing, unnecessary fires. Burning out, going back to burnout, having to deal with these many events, looking at the complexity of the organization, not understanding what is on your network. All of these things actually uh, give way to these various vulnerabilities that are often exploited. And when you really look at it, many times when these various businesses or organizations are compromised, it's surprising when you find out what it is that actually led to these various, compromises. Something that could have been easily resolved, but because of the many, activities, and also not understanding the focus of the business, the objectives, then that is where you have that disparity, taking place. So, so guys, looking at the articles in of themselves, are you seeing anything in particular that actually jumps out that you want to maybe bring to our attention?
I think I'm going to try to make Chris laugh here again, but kind of going back to what they should be learning. But I think those the leaders at FanFaction with the DDoS attack, they probably need to go back and learn what a DDoS attack is and the simple controls that they can put into to implement that. I mean, if we're just talking about, there's so much going on to learn. It's all the technology that's growing. Let's at least make sure we know the basic fundamentals and can put in simple controls for age old type of attacks. Um, that's that's what I think is one of the things going into that. But really, it's looking at that. Yeah, looking at the different vectors, knowing that you can't just focus on one thing. Like I know we've talked a lot about phishing campaigns, right? We talk about that's one of the biggest things that these threat actors like to use. But as you can see, there's all sorts of ways that they can take care of it and get into our data. So it's just making sure that maybe some of the security controls are appropriate for some of these basic things like uh, cross site scripting, DDoS attacks. This one with the U.S. agency's emails. I mean, it was a expired token. Right? Let's make sure that we have it in place, and when it's expired, we can destroy it.
Yeah.
Make sure it's not readily available to use.
Yeah, and I think it really comes down to the fundamentals. Regardless, the bad guys are always going to try to kick your door in, but taking care of the fundamentals, right? Do an active directory assessment, right? Look at where do kind of a data risk assessment if you're a CISO, right? And then you want to kind of you got to discover the data, classify the data, take inventory of it, map it, remove like all that stuff that's exposed, right? Then who owns the data? At the end of the day, the data owner, you have to work with the data owner to say, okay, this is your data. Have you classified it? Do you know where it is, how people are interacting with it? What are the control mechanisms for when that data is in transit or access to that data? You got to look at anomalies, whether it's you have a SIM tool, right? You look at your user and entity behavior, right? How are they interacting with the data? DLP, I think that's really what I was hoping we could talk about, but it really comes down to those types of basic things. And at the end of the day, you want to get to a point where you have proper data governance, right? To kind of you have controls that kind of govern the data as the data is either at rest, in use, or in transit.
Yeah, security awareness training. We focus so much in on I'm going to buy this tool for thousands of dollars. I'm going to teach my team not to click on links, and that's becoming obsolete because now the criminals have access to phishing AI tools that will just blow right by it. But when we do security awareness training, do our employees, our executives really understand the true value of data and the responsibility that we have? Chris, you talk about who's the data owner. I was in a meeting one time with a bunch of people from different sections of the business, and the guy I was with said, "Okay, who's the data privacy officer?" And everybody looked at the DPO, and he's like, "Nope." He's like, "You are, you are, you are, you are, you are," and he said, "You're the data privacy officer because that's the data that you've been entrusted with. You do not own that data. That is corporate data, and if you're misusing it, then you're misusing corporate things like corporate resources and assets." And so really getting our organizations to understand and building in the culture of the value of the data is really a good place to start, because if they don't understand, they're just like, it's an Excel sheet with numbers on it, it's worthless. But if you say, hey, no, that Excel sheet with numbers on it is worth $5 million and it can cost you your job, people start to listen a little bit closely.
Yeah, I think that's also very important. I mean, I recently did a calculation, just testing looking at, calculating or assigning value to data. And it's surprising when I actually maybe just communicate with other persons just to say, when last have you actually done a calculation to look at your data to assign a figure to the data within an organization versus what it is that they generate for revenue, the importance of that data. It's surprising. It actually places you in a different perspective in terms of, wow, are we actually operating as efficiently? Are we placing our priorities in the right place in terms of risk mitigation and the necessary control, where it is that we need to prioritize? So I think that's a very, important thing that all businesses, organizations, respective of the type, the nature, whether you are, I mean, a mid-size, large corporation, spend that time to evaluate, to assess, to assign. When you understand the true value of your data, what it is that you're working with, then it actually creates a different, maybe spin on everything that you do from a technical side, security, right up to the executives, so that the necessary steps, actions can be taken to ensure that they are operating as efficiently as best as possible. So, guys, if there are no further updates, points, then I think this is the end of our 30 minutes. And I guess the great takeaway from this is identify and managing your overall, risk within your organizations. So, see you guys next time, same place, for these informative conversations. So, guys, have a wonderful rest of the day.
Take care, guys.
Yep. Have a
Cheers.
great day.
Great.